For as long as man has thought and felt, he has questioned. And his most profound questions have always been the same. Who or what am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? What happens afterwards? And for as long as the questions have been asked, so too have there been answers for those who genuinely sought them. There is a perennial, ageless wisdom which tells of man's true nature, his place in the universe, and the purpose of all existence, including his own. This knowledge has, in modern times, been given the name Theosophy. Although the origins of this knowledge lie in the distant mists of time, there are historical records of it running through all cultures, all sacred and philosophical writings up to the present day. This stream of ancient knowledge has been kept alive through the centuries by gifted teachers, profound thinkers, aware of the cultural as well as the spiritual needs of their times. The initiate priests in Egypt, Zoroaster in Persia, Buddha in India, Lao Tse and Confucius in China, Pythagoras, Aristotle and Plato in Greece, in Palestine, the Nazarene, and in the 3rd century AD, Ammonius Saccas, who founded the eclectic theosophical system which was later banned by the Christian emperor Justinian. Just one example of the opposition to and suppression of the ancient wisdom by those who felt threatened by it. Despite these continuing suppressions, the tradition of teaching was continued in more recent times in Europe, mostly secretly, through the Hermetic, alchemical and Kabbalistic philosophies, through the Cathars and Paracelsus, and, during the Renaissance, by such men as Pico de Mirandola and Bruno, artists like Botticelli, Michelangelo, and Leonardo da Vinci. At the end of the 19th century, these threads of the wisdom teaching were woven together in the writings of Madame Helena Blavatsky, the controversial Russian who was largely responsible for introducing Eastern religious philosophy to the West, and who gave us something of the background occult knowledge that lies inherent but undeclared in many of the esoteric movements, which had never before been made public. Her object was to make this vast system of knowledge, once the preserve of an elite few, known to all those who could receive and benefit from it, to provide Theosophy for everyone. Theosophy, or Theosophia, means divine wisdom. It is a knowledge of the structure and processes of nature or cosmos, and is the ultimate basis of all exoteric religions. It results from man's attempt to explore nature, to come to know his own inner self, essentially a part of nature, and the essence of the cosmos. Theosophy is not a religion, yet it is the common ground on which all religions are based, the synthesis of science, religion, and philosophy. Institutional religion is mainly social. It seeks to bring together those of a like mind and beliefs, but so often it suffers from the failings of human nature. There are many creeds, cultures, and practices throughout the world. They all claim to be authentic, and each believes his to be the only true faith.
He was the only perfect man who ever lived.
Religion, at present, is one of the most divisive factors in human affairs, instead of being the unifying force which all the founders so obviously must have wished.
Stop believing a lie and believe in God.
Oh, hallelujah! Yes, to heaven. Heaven to know as your sins are.
But Theosophy supplies us with a knowledge of our complex nature and of its direct relationship to nature herself. Implicit in religion is the concept of deity. All religions have their own idea of their deity or God. Man has, in effect, created God in his own image. What does Theosophy say about God? Theosophy does not believe in a personal, anthropomorphic deity, but it does believe in a universal divine principle, the inmost essence or life of everything in creation. This God, referred to as the infinite, the ineffable, the changeless root of all being, is the presence within the heart of each person. It is within every rock, every leaf, every tree. All forms of substance are rooted in its eternal being. The whole cosmos, all creation, is a oneness, a unity. This is the single spiritual source from which everything proceeds. It sustains everything in every moment of time. And to it, everything eventually returns. As Blavatsky says in her book, The Key to Theosophy, our deity is the eternal, incessantly evolving, not creating, builder of the universe. The universe itself unfolding of its own essence, not being made. As another aspect, Theosophy is called the art of living and the science of life. But what does Theosophy mean by the word life in this context? Man's life as a personality is, according to Theosophy, temporary and periodical. As persons, we all come and go. But Theosophy postulates that there is that part of us which is immortal. It overshadows many successive personal lives, but itself persists, gathering the spiritual harvest of each life. This is one of the fundamental premises of Theosophy. It is reincarnation, the wheel of life. The idea of reincarnation is that there is something within us which experiences the lessons of earth life in various existences. This reincarnating ego is the essential part of us that is the fount or source of our individual consciousness. It is as though we get out of bed in the morning, dress, go out, we meet some people we have met before, some we haven't. We learn lessons, have experiences, and at night we get undressed and go to sleep. Next morning we wake up, put on different clothes, go out into a world slightly changed, and repeat the experience. Eventually, we do not have to go out into the world. We have learned its lessons. We have paid off all our debts or received all that was due to us during our many lives. We have become perfect. But until we get to that stage, we have to keep returning to this plane of experience, because it is only here that we can learn the necessary lessons and develop our characters.
Then death, so called, is but old matter dressed in some new figure and a varied vest. Thus all things are but altered, nothing dies. and here and there the unbodied spirit flies. From tenement to tenement though tossed, the soul is still the same, the figure only lost. And as the softened wax new seals receives, this face assumes, and that impression leaves. Now called by one and now another name, the form only is changed, the wax is still the same. So death, so called, can but the form deface. The immortal soul flies out in empty space to seek her fortune in another place.
Most people are scared of death. To them it means annihilation. Theosophy gives us a longer perspective. It shows us that death is not the end. It is true that each personality will disintegrate, but experiences culled from this life become the seeds of the character of the next personality. Out of that old personality, a new flower, a new personality will be born. The analogy continues. Each new summer, another personality blooms, and each flower, each leaf is unique. But passing from one season to the next, and so on, there is the plant which bears the blossoms, leaves, and fruit with its stem and its root system. Continuity is real and meaningful, but the individual expression, the individual blossom in each life, in each summer, will not live again. The individuality has progress up through all the kingdoms of nature before arriving at the man stage of evolution.
I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to animal. I died as an animal and I was man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet once more I shall die as man, to soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood I must pass on.
However, no one has ever been a mineral or a plant or an animal. It is the life essence that has passed through all these stages. It is our individuality that returns to physical life over and over again as a different person each time. This is the so-called higher ego, the immortal divine man. It is the very essence of what we really are, projecting itself into many personal lives to face their challenges and so gain the vast variety of experiences necessary for its development. When we can accept that spiritually we are not going to die, our concept of many things going on in the world at the moment is altered. For example, the desperate attempts made to keep people alive where something has gone wrong with the body and it doesn't function properly. Let them leave it and be reborn in a body they can use and be happy in, if that should be their destiny. We can take as an analogy here the Christian idea that we live through this life and then go to heaven if we're good. This is the end as far as we're concerned. We enter a state which goes on forever. But in theosophical terms, nothing goes on forever. All processes are cyclical, alternating death with birth and so on, but on an ever upward road to perfection.
Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. Not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. Shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. But he beholds the light, and whence it flows, he sees it in his joy. The youth, who daily farther from the east must travel, still is nature's priest, and by the vision splendid is on his way attended. At length the man perceives it die away, and fade into the common light of day.
الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين
Theosophy also tells us a lot about the why of existence. Instead of seeing the world as fundamentally random and chaotic, through Theosophy we have a completely new perception. Everybody suffers or enjoys quite differently. According to what they put into their previous lives, so the present life is a kind of balance in an account book. We bring forward a debit or a credit according to what we've done before. There is a law, and it is perfectly just. Most of what we suffer now is the result of what we have done. If we suffer unjustly at the hands of others, the law will compensate us. This law of cause and effect is called karma, which means action. The whole cosmic process in action is according to the law. We know from Newton that to every action there must be an equal and opposite reaction, cause and effect. The law of karma is universal law which orders and balances, keeping the universe in equilibrium. Without it, chaos would reign, atoms burst asunder, and planets fly off their courses. This law also rules our personal and individual lives. If you throw a pebble in a pond, the ripples must and will go out until they reach the edge. They're then reflected back to the center from where they came. Once you set a cause in motion, the effect, the results, must come to fruition. Every action, as a cause, must have its effect. But because of the complexity of most circumstances, that effect is unpredictable. The question that naturally arises is who or what decides our karmic fate? Theosophy says no one decides. The effect is entirely according to what we have done and our motive. The effect of an act is inherent in the act itself. The law is working all the time, ceaselessly. Cause and effect follow each other at all levels of being. There is no escape. There can be no vicarious atonement, no forgiveness of sins. Nobody can carry the can for us. All that we are and all that we do, we are responsible for. Karma is the law of perfect justice.
Once list to that voice, and all tumult is done. Your life is the life of the Infinite One. In the hurrying race, you are conscious of pause, with love for the purpose and love for the cause. You are your own devil, you are your own God. You fashioned the paths your footsteps have trod. And no one can save you from error or sin until you have harked to the Spirit within.
If reincarnation is a fact, why don't we remember our previous existences? Direct memory is obliterated by the dissolution at death of our body with its brain and the ensuing evaporation of all but our most spiritual principles. Our present life is the only significant one, the important one, because this is the one we are living now. Our next incarnations will depend on what we do with ourselves this time, and what we have become as a result of all the other incarnations that we've had. So are we our physical bodies? We can't be, because we are also the consciousness which is speaking, talking, listening, and experiencing. We are certainly using a physical body, but it is not the I. Are we our emotions? When emotions come and go, we experience them, but we cannot be them. Are we our thoughts? No, our thoughts are mostly under our control. We say, I think, I remember, I imagine, I visualize. I can decide what I shall think. So what is this ego, and what is this I which says all these things? We say, I know what I am now, but do we really know what we are right now? What we are at this moment is very elusive, and like water, it trickles through our fingers when we try to look at it. Who is doing the looking, and what is it looking at? The essential we is that point of consciousness. We talk of a reincarnating I, a reincarnating ego, which is the same I which experiences now the moment of our being. This ego is I, and yet it is more than us as a personality, with a name, a job, a home. It has at its command all the skills and all the perceptions that it has learned over a whole series of lives. It is that same I that we feel ourselves to be, but wiser, nobler, more powerful, more knowledgeable.
Thou soul that art the eternity of thought, that givest to forms and images a breath and everlasting motion. Not in vain by day or starlight, thus from my first dawn of childhood, didst thou intertwine for me the passions that build up our human soul. Not with the mean and vulgar works of man, but with high objects, with enduring things, with life and nature, purifying thus the elements of feeling and of thought, and sanctifying by such discipline both pain and fear, until we recognize a grandeur in the beatings of the heart.
The whole cosmos, the whole of creation at all levels is one thing. Everything we see has its being within that one thing and derives its being from it. As Blavatsky said, it is an interconnected whole, and we are part of it. There is nowhere else in the universe where all the elements of our being can come from, but from that one secret interior place. Like the ebb and flow of tides, the seasons of the year, waking and sleeping, work and rest, all things move cyclically. Our living and dying, the alternation of life and death, are part of that grand rhythm of life. Where do the great religious and philosophical teachers fit into this theosophical scheme? Throughout our history, the great teachers, the founders of the major religions and philosophies, have taught essentially the same things about the nature and working of the universe. They have said that we are essentially divine, that truth lies within us, not anywhere else. This was their basic message, expressed in different ways. Sri Krishna taught it. He said that we could realize it through devotion and sacrifice. The Buddha taught of suffering and its ceasing. Jesus stressed love, humility, and service. None of them put their teachings into writing. They were passed on by word of mouth, and this led to dilution and distortion, so that much of their original message, with its full meaning and power, became obscured, even lost. All these great teachers were the result of self-development. It has been said of the Lord Buddha that he was the greatest man who ever lived. About Jesus, again a great teacher, it was said that he was one of the purest people that ever lived. Because of that, he became endowed with miraculous powers. These individuals, Jesus, Buddha, and others, were real historical people, the fullest expressions of the divine element within themselves. They show us in actual and symbolic ways through their lives what is potentially the destiny for all of us. As it says in the scripture of John, "Ye are gods." Through these great teachers, we can recognize this fact. We are gods in the making. Man, even as we know him, is not yet the supreme intelligent being he will become, but we have a potential to become, like them, superhuman.
For men begin to pass their nature's bound, and find new hopes and cares which fast supplant their proper joys and grief, and outgrow all the narrow creeds of right and wrong which fade before the unmeasured thirst for good, while peace rises within them ever more and more. Such men are even now upon the earth, serene amid the half-formed creatures round.
As the evolutionary chain is continuous, there are obviously beings who have completed cycles of evolution ahead of us. Some have already reached the mountaintop. They have been through the evolutionary mill and have mastered their personalities, surmounting all their limitations. They have attained a state of consciousness far in advance of ours. In their evolved selves, we see the promise of our own future. At the outset of the modern Theosophical movement, Blavatsky claimed to be the pupil of and in touch with certain adepts, masters of the wisdom, the elder brothers of humanity. They are those human beings who, having passed beyond our stage of evolution, out of compassion, cannot and will not leave us behind. They are there to help us on our way by all legitimate means, but they cannot tread that way for us. They represent the first link in this onward chain. They are purely human as we are, but they have moved much further than us in the evolutionary journey, and beyond them, there are many who have achieved more. These masters of the wisdom were Blavatsky's direct instructors. Contacted initially as a young girl, it wasn't until she was 20 that she actually met one in the flesh for the first time. It was he who guided her so that she would learn to know her own inner self and bring under control her latent psychic and occult powers. He instructed her in their nature, not just for her own enlightenment, but that she could pass her knowledge on to others. This she tried to do in her prolific writings. After having established the Theosophical Society in America in 1875, Blavatsky toured India with its co-founder, Colonel Henry Olcott, to promote Theosophy. The wisdom that had come from the East had now come full circle, back to its roots, and a headquarters for the society was established near Madras at Adyar. The Theosophists in the 19th century saw that there could be links between Western philosophy, science and culture and the rich traditions of the East, particularly of India. This was a recurrent fascination for people in the 20th century, particularly in the 1960s, when many hippies went to India to learn for themselves. They were following a path that had already been trodden by Blavatsky and some of the early Theosophists. Today, Blavatsky's great classic, The Secret Doctrine, containing knowledge from more than 1,100 reference works, has become the cornerstone of modern theosophy. It is an immense contribution to human knowledge and has had a profound effect on the course of Western philosophic and scientific thinking. Blavatsky was ahead of her time in that she sowed seeds which will germinate only in this and future centuries. She shattered some of the then current ideas of Darwinian evolution and preempted many discoveries in science, for example, that atoms are infinitely divisible. Science is coming increasingly closer to supporting her teachings on the unity of life and the nature of energy. As science progresses, and if scientists can remain really open-minded, we will see that many of these ideas, once relegated to superstition, will become accepted common knowledge, as many aspects of modern science begin to approximate to the mystical. This isn't surprising, as science grew out of mystical traditions. Sir Isaac Newton, Galileo, Descartes, Kepler, Copernicus were all mystics, and what they believed they were doing through their science was discovering the eternal truths behind the world processes. Some of them were Platonic mystics, believing that behind the world we live in there is an invisible, transcendent realm of eternal forms or ideas. They said God was a mathematician, and they were discovering the celestial mathematics behind the formation of the universe. This kind of Pythagorean or Platonic mysticism has influenced science through all the ages, and is still in the background of some scientific thinking. The 19th century scientific thinkers, however, dispensed with God. They reduced him to the ghost in the machine. To break down this dogmatic agnosticism and to stem materialism was one of the aims in the founding of the Theosophical Society. Several scientists of the day, notably Edison and Crookes, were attracted to the society and to Blavatsky's work. There is a report in the archives in Adyar of someone who visited Einstein in 1923 in Princeton and was amazed to see a copy of The Secret Doctrine on his desk. Einstein told them, for someone who had no background in science, Blavatsky predicted a number of premises in modern science. Einstein also said that knowledge is experience, the rest is just information. Theosophy has been a motivating influence on many prominent people, from Einstein to the great 18th century inventor and scientist Benjamin Franklin, to the early and lifelong member of the Theosophical Society, Thomas Edison. This is the common background of truth upon which they all drew. Aldous Huxley wrote his famous Perennial Philosophy based on many of the theosophical tenets that were then contained in the world's literature. In recent times, the psychologists, the the scientists of the mind, have found illumination in Theosophy, although they are not acquainted with, or mostly take no notice of, the occult constitution of man, which would cast great light on their problems. Carl Jung, Friedrich Nietzsche, Albert Schweitzer, all had known and documented affinities with the concept of reincarnation, which, as we know, is basic to Theosophy. Many of the great writers, too, had this empathy. Tolstoy, writing in Russia, "The deeds of the preceding life give directions to the present life." Goethe in Germany. Balzac in France, almost echoing Tolstoy. And Blavatsky. A lifetime may be needed merely to gain the virtues which annul the errors of man's preceding life. And of course the poets, most naturally, recognize and identify with some theosophical ideas. Poetry is, after all, the dance of the soul. Three of the most famous American poets acknowledged instinctively the truth of the continuity of life. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who knew the secret of the world, that all things subsist and do not die, only retire from sight a while, and then return. Henry David Thoreau, whose poetry was the essence of his love of nature. Both could totally agree with Walt Whitman, father of modern American poetry, who said simply, "I know I am deathless." We can all be theosophists, at least to the extent of identifying with that spiritual impulse, the central trunk upon which all doctrines, all philosophies, sciences, and all art and culture have been based, and from which they emerge. This great knowledge has been transmitted down the ages through the people who have known it. And if we make an effort to find out what it's about, and then apply it as far as we can, we will be eternally grateful for whatever we achieve in terms of understanding, liberation from the limitations of the physical flesh, and a freedom of consciousness that would have been undreamt of otherwise. One of the Mahatmas said, through Blavatsky, "Test Theosophy, whether its teachings are true. If you find they are true, then live it." To live theosophically, to recognize your brotherhood with all men and creatures, is to understand that each person has his or her own unique nature and path to tread. It was written on the great Delphic oracle, "Man, know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe." In theosophical words, if you come to know the essence of yourself, you will know the essence of all life and the nature and processes of nature herself, from which we all derive our being, and from which we all proceed in every aspect of our being.
The human hearts can go the lengths of God. Dark and cold we may be, but this is no winter now. The frozen misery of centuries breaks, cracks, begins to move. The thunder is the thunder of the flows, the thaw, the flood, the upstart spring. Thank God our time is now, when wrong comes to meet us everywhere, never to leave us till we take the longest stride of soul men ever took. Affairs are now soul size. Where are you making for? It takes so many lives to wake. But will you wake for pity's sake? The enterprise is exploration into God.